Welcome to the very first episode of this Sports Gazette mini-series with me, Yasmin Ryder. Today's episode will be exploring the topic of puberty, periods and sport for young females. We'll be joined by junior athlete Issey Kyson.
Hi, I'm Scott Kyson and I'm a 14-year-old junior athlete and I live in London.
And her dad, Scott Kyson.
Hello, I'm Scott Kyson and I'm Isabel's father.
Both Issey and Scott speak so openly throughout this episode, from her period and journey through puberty to bodily changes and hair growth, not to mention everything that comes in between. But firstly, I wanted to find out how Issey got into athletics.
I first started athletics at the age of 9, where I first started off doing junior park runs every Sunday morning. And that was when I met John Stowe, who then recruited me and invited me to join Woodford Green in Essex Ladies. And that was when I got introduced to athletics and I first started off doing cross country.
And Scott, what is your earliest memory of Issey running?
One of my earliest memories with Issey would be when she was perhaps about 5 or 6 years old and asked to come along on a run with me. And I recall the conversations being trying to figure out what age she would be and what age I would be when she would eventually surpass me. And I think it's fair to say that passed a few years ago.
So Issey, could you tell us when you first got your period and what this experience was like for you?
I started my period in year 7, just before my 12th birthday, and I can remember it being one of the most memorable experiences I'll ever have. I was in a school toilet and I went to go to the toilet and then I realised that I was bleeding and I screamed quite loudly because I was really shocked and I didn't know what to do. And the girl next door to me, well, in the cubicle next to me, knocked on the separating wall, and she was like, "Are you okay in there?" And I was like, "Yep, I'm fine." But that was my experience of getting my first period.
And Scott, did you notice any changes in Issey once she'd started her period and going through puberty?
I guess some of the changes that we noticed with Isabel when she started puberty are ones that you would expect. Obviously, starting her period, turning into a moody tween, which you're kind of prepared for in some respects and you're expecting. And I guess the one that we wasn't expecting was that she went through a really ravenous phase for about 4 to 6 weeks, where she was eating all the time and she would eat junk, she would eat anything that she could get her hands on. And it was more perhaps not obvious at the time, but sort of retrospectively looking back, I think she gained a significant amount of weight in a very quick amount of time. And obviously when you see somebody daily, you don't really notice these changes. But now, with the ability to look back at photos that were taken before and after, you can see there was quite a significant change in quite a short period of time.
And Issey, have you felt your period has had an impact on your training?
I think my period definitely has impacted my training. I normally feel quite lethargic when I'm on my period, and that can make it quite difficult to feel motivated to go training.
And what about an impact on your confidence?
My period, I don't think tends to affect my confidence, although a couple of years ago I tried to use it as more of a confidence boost. Where my old coach, Christine Bloomfield, she used to say, "Oh, Issey's looking extra powerful today," and she'd be like, "Are you on your period?" I'd be like, yeah, I am. And we had almost like an inside joke of this period power kind of thing. But I have found recently that has changed for me.
And what do you feel has changed since then?
I have experienced a lot of side effects. I've experienced weight gain, body changes, mood changes, body hair growth, and all of these I have struggled with quite a lot, and it's affected my self-esteem and my self-confidence.
And Scott, can you tell us from your perspective how Issey's period has impacted her?
The impact on Issey, I think the weight gain was quite a significant one, and I guess that was twofold. One, she certainly wasn't a vain girl in any way, but she would be concerned about what she would call the sort of flab, if you like, around her belly, and the sort of just what I guess we would call puppy fat that had built up, and it was something that made her a lot more bodily conscious. And then I suppose the other tricky thing, which it's hard to say how specifically that affected her in her competitions, because it was during the pandemic, so competitions were sort of few and far between in the sort of summer of 2020, but definitely her performances were not at the level that she would have expected them to be, and probably a drop off from the year before. And typically in children, you tend to see quite a big improvement year on year as they grow. So I think it was quite tough for her to see that whilst she was putting in all the training, and even when we was in lockdown, she was doing a lot of training with her friends. She was doing lots of hill training, and for her not to see the results on the track, I think was quite hard for her to handle.
And Issey, who do you speak to when you're struggling with your period? Who's your support network?
When I'm struggling with my period, I tend to turn towards either my mum or my friends. I tend to turn to my friends because I just find it quite easy to talk to them, as we always have that friendly connection, and it's just easy to sympathise with each other and give each other advice, knowing that we're all going through the same kind of changes.
Would you feel comfortable talking to your dad or your male coach?
I would say that I'm very comfortable speaking to my dad and my male coach about my period. I do talk to my dad a lot about my period and how I'm feeling before training sessions, and just my mood in general, and what changes or things that I'm struggling with.
A lot of girls a similar age to you, Issey, don't feel comfortable talking about their experiences of their period and puberty, for example. How have you managed this?
I think I've become so comfortable talking about my body changes and my periods and puberty is because I have quite open parents, and because I've grown up in quite an open environment, it means that I've grown up as quite an open person myself. And I'm lucky to also have friends who are very open-minded about subjects and are very open to sharing our stories and the changes that we're going through.
You mentioned earlier about feeling more self-conscious. Can you explain why this might be the case?
Yeah, sometimes I do feel quite self-conscious when I'm competing and training, particularly when I'm wearing a crop top or just a sports bra. I tend to feel more self-conscious about my stomach area, especially when I go into the blocks, and because I'm quite hunched up, you can see my stomach starts to roll, you can see my tummy roll sometimes, and I feel really self-conscious that people are just staring at that. Also, when I'm wearing shorts and a crop top, sometimes if I bend over to do my shoelaces, a bit of my stomach overhangs on my shorts, and I get quite self-conscious that people would be constantly staring at that. And sometimes when I'm wearing vests or something that's not covering my armpits, I get really scared that people are going to be just looking at my armpits for some reason. I mean, I'm pretty sure people don't do this, but it's just something that goes through my head is if, I don't know, people are looking at the hair on my legs or the hair on my armpits sometimes, if I'm doing drills where my hands are in the air. And yeah, I tend to feel quite self-conscious about body fat and body hair.
And Scott, as a parent, how did you help Issey cope with these changes?
I think really giving her information and access to people to talk to was key really for Isabel. We would research and give her information, and equally she would do a lot on her own. What was also helpful was the network of coaches and athletes that she was around were able to provide a lot of insight and support. And I think really that empowered her to get through it. And not only that, it gave her a bit of a hunger to share that information with others.
And Issey, what would your advice be for other young girls or female athletes going through similar experiences to yourself?
I would say that the biggest piece of advice that I could give them is that these bodily changes that you're going through are not permanent. They're all part of a long change, and if you think you're going through a negative body change, just know that this is part of a process, and this isn't you're not going to be stuck like this forever, and that other people are going through this as well, and you can lean on others for support.
And Scott, as a parent, what would your advice be to other parents in a similar position to yourself?
I certainly think there could be more information and support for parents of girls in sports. And I think it needs to be something that's accessible and out there for perhaps to reach the parents who are not looking for the information. I know that sounds weird, but the people who are looking and know how to find information will always get it. But I think it's reaching those parents who are not looking for it so that they can get hold of that information and they can support their daughter. How we do that, I don't know.
In a UK survey by Women in Sport, over 4,000 teenagers revealed that 43% of girls felt they were sporty at school but would no longer consider themselves to be. As pointed out by the survey, published in March 2022, this equates to around 1.3 million girls across the UK. Complex barriers such as puberty, periods, and body image are just some factors revealed to be deterring young girls from sport and exercise. 73% of girls from the survey stated they avoided sport altogether when on their period. 73% confirming they do not like others watching them, and 68% due to fears of being judged. Other factors such as lack of confidence, schoolwork pressures, and not feeling safe exercising outside all had significant consequences on whether girls continued sport or dropped out. Issey, in your opinion, why do you think the dropout rate for girls is much higher than that of boys?
I think the dropout rate in sports for girls is a lot higher than boys because the changes that we go through are a lot more debilitating. For example, the weight gain that a lot of us will go through is quite debilitating as it can make us feel really self-conscious, particularly when wearing sportswear, which can make us not want to attend training or do sports anymore. And particularly periods are very difficult to deal with because you can have cramps, which can really put you off doing sports, mood swings, bloating, and a lot of other symptoms can make women feel quite debilitated and not feel up to doing sports. Whilst I think that boys tend to go through changes that are a bit more positive. Not saying that they don't have their own struggles, but their changes seem to be a lot less debilitating.
And Scott, what are your thoughts on this?
I think the effects of puberty on boys can be quite positive in terms of their performance in sports. So you'll typically see them getting bigger, stronger, faster, whereas the effects on girls are a lot more complex. And I think collectively, body image, periods, body hair, social pressures are really causing girls to consider whether they want to stay involved in sport, and I guess this is what's increasing that dropout rate. And I think what's a real shame is that this is in reality over the period of their life. It's such a short chapter, but it's very hard sometimes to see the wood through the trees and to realise that in 6 months, 12 months' time, it will all be back to normal again.
And Issey, do you think there's anything that can be done to prevent this dropout rate among girls?
I think that there should be a section in the PE curriculum that's added where it teaches us about how going through puberty and periods affects us in sports. It doesn't have to be a large amount of the curriculum, but it could only be just a small bit, like just a lesson at the beginning of the year or just a lesson every now and again. We get taught a lot about the physical changes and the emotional changes, but we don't get taught how it will actually affect us in sports, and I think that could really help prevent a significant dropout rate.
And Scott, what are your thoughts?
I think one of the areas that could really help girls is in education. Isabel recently pointed out that in PSHE and in science you will learn about the physiology and the biology of what is going through the anatomy and what changes are going to happen, but this isn't part of the physical education curriculum, and I think it would be a really easy change to have PE teachers educated to know or to be able to teach the children what changes are going to happen to them and how that might affect them in sports. And I think this isn't an expensive programme, it's just a very small change that could happen in the national curriculum.
And finally, Issey, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think that if we get rid of this taboo around periods in my generation, the generations afterwards aren't going to have to deal with the taboo of periods.
This episode wouldn't have been possible without Issey and Scott's openness to share. Talking about your period and the experiences of puberty shouldn't be a topic we shy away from. So let's remember, a problem shared is a problem halved. Yasmin Ryder, Sports Gazette.